California, 1989. A young mother and her two infant daughters leave Bakersfield for a short trip to Ontario. They never arrive. No crash, no call, no trace. The car vanishes somewhere between the valley and the desert, leaving behind a family trapped in questions and 3 lives that seem to disappear into thin air. For 36 years, no one knew what happened to them. Then, a fingerprint and a strand of DNA uncovered a truth no one saw coming. This is the true story of Marina Ramos. Before we begin this story, let's together type "Justice for Marina Ramos" in the comment to make sure her case is never forgotten by the world. It began as an ordinary morning in the summer of 1989, one of those clear Bakersfield days when the heat hadn't yet settled in and the world seemed kind. Marina Ramos, 28 years old, moved through her small apartment with the practiced efficiency of a mother who'd learned to do everything one-handed. She zipped the diaper bag closed and dropped baby bottles into the side pockets with muffled thuds. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, still damp from the shower. She had 2 daughters. Elizabeth, 14 months old, was toddling after her with a stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand, leaving tiny footprints on the linoleum. And Jasmin, just 2 months old, was still at that impossibly small stage where every breath seemed fragile, a warm weight against Marina's shoulder with her tiny fingers curled reflexively around the fabric of her mother's shirt. Marina's cousin Rosa sat at the kitchen table watching her move from room to room. The morning light came through the kitchen window at an angle, catching dust motes in the air, while somewhere down the hall a neighbor's radio played softly. "You sure about this?" Rosa asked, her voice careful, as she wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, not drinking, just holding it. Marina glanced over, bouncing Jasmin gently against her shoulder in that automatic rhythm all mothers know, the one that says, "I'm here, you're safe." "I need to get out of here for a few days," she said. "Clear my head. Fernando said we could stay with him in Ontario." Rosa's expression tightened, and the coffee mug shifted in her hands. She'd met Fernando once, maybe twice. He was friendly enough, but something about him felt unfinished, like a sentence that trailed off before the important part. "You barely know him," Rosa said quietly. Marina smiled, that familiar smile that said she'd already made up her mind. She set Jasmin down in the bassinet for a moment and knelt to pick up Elizabeth, who'd dropped her rabbit and was making that pre-cry face with her mouth open and breath held. "I met him at the park. He's been nice to the girls. And honestly, Rosa, I need to go somewhere different for a while." There was a pause, the kind that hangs between people who love each other but can't find the right words. The refrigerator hummed, and a car drove past outside with its engine fading into the distance. Rosa stood up with the chair legs scraping against the floor, then walked over and placed a hand on Marina's arm, feeling the warmth of her skin, the realness of her. "Just call me when you get there, okay? Let me know you're safe." "I will," Marina promised. She kissed her cousin on the cheek with that quick, familiar press of lips against skin that families share without thinking. Then she gathered the girls, Jasmin back in her arms, Elizabeth holding onto her leg, and headed for the door with the diaper bag thumping against her hip as she walked. Outside, a black SUV was idling at the curb, its engine rumbling in a low, steady vibration. Fernando sat behind the wheel with sunglasses on, despite the early hour, and one arm draped casually over the steering wheel. He waved when he saw them in that slow, easy gesture. Rosa stood in the doorway watching as Marina buckled the girls into their car seats. Marina buckled the girls in, the seat belts clicking, while Elizabeth babbled and held her rabbit up to the window. Jasmin slept with her tiny fist curled against her cheek, oblivious to everything. Marina climbed into the passenger seat and rolled down the window. The smell of summer, hot asphalt, and dry grass drifted in. "We'll be back in a few days," she called out. "Maybe a week. I'll call you tonight." Rosa nodded, forcing a smile with her hand gripping the doorframe. "Drive safe." The SUV pulled away from the curb with its tires crunching over gravel at the edge of the road. Rosa watched until it turned the corner and disappeared, the black paint catching the sun one last time before it was gone. That was the last time anyone from the family saw Marina Ramos alive. The rest of the day passed quietly in Bakersfield. Rosa went to work at the grocery store where she dealt with the beep of scanners, the rustle of paper bags, and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She rang up customers, stocked shelves, smiled when she was supposed to, and tried not to think about the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest like a stone. By evening, she was home making dinner with onions sizzling in a pan and the television murmuring in the other room with voices she wasn't really listening to. She glanced at the clock. 7 p.m. Marina should have called by now. Maybe they hit traffic. Maybe Jasmin was fussy and they had to stop. Maybe the phone at Fernando's place wasn't working. Rosa told herself all the reasonable things people tell themselves when worry starts to creep in. But by 9 p.m., she couldn't ignore it anymore. She called Fernando's number, the one Marina had scribbled on a piece of paper before leaving. The phone rang in her ear. 1 ring, 2, 3. The sound hollow and endless. No answer. She called again at 10 with still nothing, just ringing and then silence. By midnight, Rosa was pacing her kitchen with the phone cord wrapped around her finger, cutting off circulation. The house was too quiet, and every creak of the floorboards felt loud. "Come on, Marina," she whispered to the empty room. "Pick up." But the phone never rang back. The next morning, Rosa called Marina's sister, Margarita, with her hand shaking as she dialed. "Have you heard from Marina?" Rosa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "No," Margarita said. "Why? What's wrong?" "She left yesterday with Fernando, said she was going to Ontario. She was supposed to call last night." There was a pause on the line where Rosa could hear breathing, the sound of someone processing. "And she didn't?" "No." Margarita's voice shifted, sharpening. "Who's Fernando?" "Some guy she met. I don't know much about him. She said he was nice, that he offered to let her stay at his place for a few days." Another pause, longer this time, and Rosa could hear her sister swallow. "Rosa, I don't like this." "I know. Me neither." They decided to wait one more day. Maybe Marina just needed space. Maybe she'd call tonight. But that night came and went in silence. By the third day, Margarita drove to Bakersfield. She and Rosa went to the address Marina had given them for Fernando, a small apartment complex in a part of town neither of them knew well, with cracked sidewalks, chain-link fences, and the smell of someone grilling meat drifting from a patio. They knocked on the door with 3 sharp raps that echoed in the outdoor hallway. No answer. A neighbor leaned out from the unit next door, curious. "You looking for Fernando?" the man asked. "Yes," Margarita said. "Have you seen him?" The man shrugged, scratching his jaw. "Not in a few days. Comes and goes, that one. Keeps to himself." Margarita's stomach tightened. "Did you see him leave with anyone? A woman? 2 babies?" The neighbor thought for a moment with his eyes narrowing, then shook his head. "Can't say I did, but I'm not here much." Rosa and Margarita stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door where the paint was peeling near the handle. "We need to call the police," Rosa said quietly. "And tell them what?" Margarita replied. "That our sister went somewhere with a guy we don't know and hasn't called in 3 days?" Rosa looked at her with hard eyes. "Yes, exactly that." The Bakersfield police took the report, but their response was measured and cautious. "She's an adult," the officer said with his pen hovering over the form, tapping against the paper in that rhythmic way. Tap, tap, tap. "She left voluntarily. No signs of foul play." "She has 2 babies with her," Margarita said with her voice tight. "She wouldn't just disappear?" The officer nodded sympathetically, but his eyes said what his mouth didn't. "You'd be surprised what people do. We'll put out a notice. If anyone reports seeing her, we'll contact you." It wasn't enough, but it was all they had. Margarita and Rosa printed flyers, hundreds of them, while the copy machine at the library hummed and spat out page after page. Missing Marina Ramos and 2 children. They taped them to telephone poles, gas station windows, and laundromat bulletin boards with the sticky sound of packing tape unrolling and the flutter of paper in the wind. The paper curled in the heat, the ink faded, and the wind tore some loose, scattering them across parking lots like dead leaves. Margarita took time off work to drive the route Marina might have taken, Highway 58 toward Barstow, then down through the desert toward Ontario. She stopped at every rest area, every diner, every gas station, dealing with the smell of diesel and burnt coffee and the ding of bells over glass doors. "Have you seen this woman?" she'd ask, holding up the photo with both hands to make sure they looked. Most people shook their heads, and some barely looked. But a few said they might have. "I think I saw someone like that," a waitress at a truck stop said while wiping down a counter with a rag that smelled like bleach. She had 2 little ones with her, asked where the payphone was. "When?" Margarita asked, leaning forward with her heart suddenly loud in her ears. The waitress frowned, staring at a spot on the wall. "Maybe Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm not sure, honey. We see a lot of people." Another man at a rest area near Needles said he'd seen a woman with 2 babies sitting in a black SUV while he was filling his truck with gas. She looked tired, he said, like she'd been on the road a while. But there were no names, no license plates, no proof. Every lead felt solid for a few hours, then crumbled under the weight of uncertainty. Weeks turned into months. The local news covered the story once, briefly, and Marina's face appeared on screen for maybe 10 seconds, frozen in a photograph that didn't do her justice. Then it was gone, replaced by other tragedies. Margarita kept calling the police, kept asking if there was any news. The phone would ring twice before someone picked up, and she could already hear the answer in their voice. "Nothing yet. We're still looking." But she could hear it in their voices. They weren't looking, not really. The case had gone cold before it ever had a chance to be hot. But 150 miles away, in the unforgiving desert of Arizona, something was waiting to be found. The desert along Old Temple Bar Road in Mojave County, Arizona, had been holding its secrets for days. It was December 12th, 1989, when someone finally found what had been left there. The desert here is unforgiving, a landscape that swallows sound and holds heat like a fist. Scrubland stretches for miles, interrupted only by the occasional cluster of Joshua trees, twisted, skeletal shapes against the white sky. The highway is a long, empty ribbon connecting Las Vegas to Point South, shimmering in the distance where heat meets horizon. It's the kind of landscape where things disappear. A group of hikers making their way toward the Grand Canyon pulled off the highway to stretch their legs. Gravel crunched under their boots and the air was dry enough to crack lips, to make breathing feel like work. One of them wandered a short distance from the road looking for a place to relieve himself. His footsteps disturbed the dust, and a lizard skittered away over a rock. That's when he saw her, a body, female, naked, stabbed multiple times. She'd been left in the open, as if whoever killed her wanted her to be found or simply didn't care. For a moment, he just stood there while the desert wind moved through the brush, making a sound like breathing. His own breath stopped. Then he turned and ran back to the others. The Mojave County Sheriff's Office arrived within the hour with the crunch of tires on dirt and radio-static crackling. Deputies spread out across the scene, photographing, measuring, documenting, with the click and whir of cameras and the scratch of pens on notepads. The sun beat down without mercy, while sweat ran down backs and soaked through uniforms. Flies had already found her. There were footprints in the dust. 2 sets, 2 suspects. One taller, between 5'10" and 6'2", the other shorter, between 5'4" and 5'8". They'd stood here for some time based on the depth of the prints and the way they overlapped. Whatever happened, it hadn't been quick. But the victim was a ghost with no identification, no purse, No car nearby, no jewelry, no clothing, nothing that might carry a name or an address. The detectives tried to take her fingerprints, but the technology of the time failed them. The desert heat had degraded the skin, and the prints were unusable, just smudged ridges that told them nothing. She was buried as Jane Doe, a woman with no name, no family, no story, just a case number and a cold grave in soil that barely held moisture. The file went into storage in a cardboard box on a metal shelf in a room that smelled like dust and old paper. Decades passed. The desert kept its secrets, the wind erased the footprints, and the Joshua trees stood watch over nothing. 2 days after the body was discovered in the Arizona desert, 150 miles away in Colonia Park, Oxnard, California, another piece of this dark puzzle was about to surface. It was mid-morning on December 14, 1989, when Larry Acosta began his routine rounds through the park. He'd been the director there for years, and he knew the rhythm of the place, the way the swings creaked in the wind with that particular metallic groan, the echo of children's voices bouncing off the restroom walls, the smell of cut grass and sunscreen. But that morning, there was a sound he didn't recognize. Crying. Not the wailing of a scraped knee or the protest of nap time. This was different. Continuous, urgent, raw. Coming from the women's restroom near the main pavilion. He stood outside the door for a moment, listening, with his hand on the doorframe, feeling the rough texture of painted cinder block. The crying continued, layered now with two distinct voices, one higher than the other, one that rose and fell in waves, another that was constant, exhausted, barely human anymore. But there were no adult sounds, no soothing voice, no footsteps, no flush of a toilet or run of water. Just the babies. Just that sound, high and desperate, echoing off tile walls. Acosta's heart began to pound. He found a woman nearby, a mother with her own child, and asked her to check inside. When she opened the door, what she saw would haunt the case for more than 3 decades. 2 infants lying on the wet floor of the bathroom. The tile was cold and damp from someone's careless aim at the sink or a leak under the stall. The smell of industrial soap and urine hung in the stale air. One was maybe 14 months old enough to sit up, to reach with desperate hands for someone who wasn't there. Dark hair stuck to her forehead with sweat and tears, her face red and swollen from crying. The other was tiny, weeks old perhaps, still at that age where her neck couldn't fully support her head. She lay on her back with her arms and legs moving weakly, her cry more of a rasp now, hoarse from screaming for hours. They were alone. No diaper bag, no note, no blanket, no bottles. No one standing watch, even from a distance. Just 2 babies on a cold floor, crying for someone who would never come back. Officer Scott Hebert arrived within minutes, with the squawk of his radio preceding him. He'd been with the Oxnard Police Department long enough to know that abandoned children usually meant something darker was unfolding somewhere else. He took in the scene, the fluorescent light flickering overhead, the babies with their small bodies so vulnerable on that hard surface. The older baby, Elizabeth, had dark hair and searching eyes. Even in her distress, she looked around, looked at faces, as if hoping one of them would be the right one. The younger one, Jasmin, was barely 2 months old, still curled in that newborn way with her fists pressed against her face, trying to self-soothe in the only way she knew how. Someone had left them here on purpose. Someone had walked away, knowing they were alone, knowing they were crying. The question was why. Hebert radioed for backup with his voice steady and professional, but his hands were shaking as he reached down to pick up Jasmin. She was so light, barely 8 pounds, fragile as glass. Police canvassed the park and spoke to witnesses who'd been there earlier that morning, dog walkers, joggers, parents with their own children. A few people remembered seeing a woman. She'd been wearing distinctive clothing, a long red skirt that moved when she walked and bright white boots that caught the light, the kind you couldn't forget even if you tried. She'd been with the children, and she hadn't been alone. Witnesses described two men with her. Hispanic males, they said. One was carrying the older child against his hip, while the woman had the baby wrapped in a yellow blanket with the corner of it trailing as she walked. They'd arrived in a black mini pickup truck with the engine running and doors left open, and then all three adults had simply disappeared, leaving two infants behind in a public bathroom, leaving them on wet tile to scream until someone found them. The babies were taken into emergency custody, wrapped in blankets that smelled like laundry detergent, placed in car seats that weren't theirs, and driven away by strangers. But here's what no one knew yet. 150 miles away in the Arizona desert, their mother was already dead, and the people who left them there were already gone. Within hours, the two infants were placed with a foster family in Ventura County. Social workers did what they could to trace the children's origins, but in 1989, the tools available were limited. No DNA databases, no digital footprints, just paper records and phone calls that led nowhere. Elizabeth and Jasmin stayed in the system for what officials would later describe as a significant amount of time. Eventually, they were adopted, together thankfully, by a family who gave them new names and a new life. The case was documented, filed, archived in a manila folder in a filing cabinet. And then it went quiet. No one came forward to claim the girls. No missing persons report was ever connected to them. The woman in white boots and red skirt was never identified. The two men were never found. For years, it seemed like the babies in the bathroom would remain just that, an unsolved mystery, a fragment of someone else's tragedy. Meanwhile, back in Bakersfield, Margarita Maldonado never stopped looking. In the early 1990s, Margarita drove through neighborhoods asking questions, showing Marina's photo to anyone who would look. But as the years passed, the trail grew colder. People forgot, moved away, stopped caring. The police stopped returning her calls as often. "We followed every lead," one detective told her in 1992. "There's no evidence of foul play, no sign of an accident. We can't track her beyond the California border." To Margarita, it felt like betrayal. Marina wouldn't just vanish into the desert. She loved those babies more than her own life. But without proof, the case began to cool. The file moved from one desk to another until it found its way into storage. Margarita kept a notebook beside her bed, a diary of leads, names, dates, and prayers. Day 147, no call, no word. Please God, let them be safe somewhere. Day 208, dreamed of Marina again. She was smiling. Day 400, nothing. The human mind has a way of making room for pain. Life continued in its quiet rhythm, but beneath it all, the waiting never stopped. In Puerto Rico, Marina's oldest daughter was being raised by her grandparents. She was just a child when her mother disappeared, and she grew up with stories of Marina, of the two little sisters she'd never met. As she got older, she made a promise to herself. If there was ever a way to find them, she would do it. Years passed. Then, decades. Technology changed and DNA testing became more accessible. The oldest daughter began submitting her DNA to every database she could find: ancestry sites, genealogy networks, medical registries. She was searching for ghosts. She had no idea that somewhere in a cold case file in Arizona, a woman with no name was waiting to be identified. And when those two threads finally crossed, everything would change. In 2022, in Mojave County, Arizona, investigator Lori Miller sat in a small evidence room, staring at a box labeled Unidentified Female, 1989. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the room smelled like old cardboard and stale coffee. She'd been working cold cases for years and had seen plenty of Jane Does, but something about this one nagged at her. A woman, stabbed multiple times, left in the desert with no ID and no name, buried for 33 years. Miller had something her predecessors didn't have: new technology. She opened the box carefully. Inside were photographs, faded Polaroids of a crime scene that time had tried to erase, along with evidence bags and reports typed on actual typewriters with the letters slightly crooked. In February 2022, she resubmitted the victim's fingerprints to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. She'd done this before with other cases. Usually nothing came back. Usually the Jane Does stayed nameless. But this time was different. Within 24 hours, she had a hit. Miller was at her desk when the notification came through with the ping of an email. She clicked it open while her coffee went cold beside her. Not a match to the victim's real name, but to an alias. Maria Ortiz, a woman who'd been arrested for shoplifting in Bakersfield, California in June 1989. Miller's pulse quickened. She pulled the arrest record, and the system was slow, loading one line at a time. And then the photograph appeared. A young woman with dark hair, tired eyes, and a careful smile. The kind of smile people wear in booking photos when they're embarrassed, when they know this moment will follow them. Miller stared at the screen. She pulled up the autopsy photos from 1989 and laid them side by side, the bone structure, the shape of the jaw, the spacing of the eyes. She felt something click into place, that moment investigators live for. The fingerprints matched perfectly. Miller began pulling threads. The shoplifting arrest led to an address. The address led to family members. Family members led to phone calls, hesitant conversations, and old memories stirred back to life. And family members led to DNA confirmation. The Jane Doe had a name, Marina Ramos, 28 years old, a mother, originally from Bakersfield. But Marina Ramos wasn't just a Jane Doe, she was a mother, and her children were still out there, somewhere. When Miller called Margarita Maldonado, she rehearsed the words in her head first. She'd made calls like this before, and they never got easier. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. "Hello?" Margarita's voice, older now, cautious. "Mrs. Maldonado, this is Investigator Lori Miller with the Mojave County Sheriff's Office." The line was quiet for a long time. Miller could hear breathing and a television in the background with voices turned low. "We've found your sister," Miller said gently. More silence. Then, "Is she?" "I'm so sorry," Miller said. "She's been gone since 1989. There was a sound on the other end. Not a scream, not a sob, just a long, shuddering breath, the sound of someone releasing 33 years of hope all at once. "All this time," Margarita whispered, "she was right there." Miller gave her a moment. She could hear Margarita crying softly, trying to muffle it, trying to hold it together. Then Miller asked the question that would change everything. "Mrs. Maldonado, did your sister have children?" Margarita's voice cracked. "Yes, 2 daughters, Elizabeth and Jasmin. They were babies when she disappeared." Miller's hand tightened around the pen. "Can you tell me how old they were?" "Elizabeth was about 14 months. Jasmin was just 2 months old." Miller wrote it down with her hand trembling slightly. The numbers stared back at her. "Mrs. Maldonado, we're going to do everything we can to find them." Miller threw herself into the investigation. She reached out to every county in California, searching for records of abandoned children from December 1989. She sent emails, made phone calls, and faxed documents to departments that still used fax machines. She posted on social media, contacted adoption agencies, and asked the media for help. But the months passed, and the silence held. Until August 2025, a woman in her mid-30s uploaded her DNA to a genetic genealogy website. She'd been adopted as an infant, raised in Southern California, and like many adoptees, she was curious about her biological family. She filled out the forms, spit into a tube, mailed it off, and forgot about it for a few weeks. When the results came back, she almost didn't open them. The match came back strong, too strong to ignore. Her DNA connected her to the Ramos family, specifically to the relatives of a woman named Marina, a woman who'd been murdered in Arizona in 1989. The woman stared at her screen while her hands started to shake. She read the names, the dates, the percentages of shared DNA. This wasn't a distant cousin. This was immediate family. Miller received the notification and felt her pulse quicken. She'd been waiting for this moment, hoping for it, praying for it. She reached out to the woman carefully, explaining the case, asking questions, trying not to overwhelm her. The woman told her something extraordinary. She and her sister had been adopted together. They'd been found abandoned in a park bathroom in Oxnard, California, in December 1989. They'd been just babies then, 14 months and 2 months old. Their adoptive parents had told them the story growing up, how they'd been found, how no one had ever come for them, how they'd been given a second chance. Miller's heart was pounding now. She pulled up the Oxnard case file with the dates, the ages, the descriptions. Marina's body had been found on December 12, 1989. The babies were found in Oxnard on December 14th. 2 days. 150 miles. The timeline fit and the ages matched perfectly. Miller requested further DNA testing through official channels this time, lab confirmed. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon. Miller was alone in her office when she opened the report. 99.9% probability. The two women were Elizabeth and Jasmin Ramos, Marina's daughters. The babies abandoned in that bathroom weren't orphans. They were survivors, and their mother had been dead for 36 years. Miller sat in her office, staring at the phone. Outside, the sun was setting. The light came through the blinds in stripes, with dust floating in the beams. She'd made difficult calls before, but this one felt different. She dialed Margarita's number, and each ring felt like an eternity. When Margarita answered, Miller could hear the television in the background, the sound of a normal evening, dishes being washed, life continuing. "Mrs. Maldonado," Miller said, "it's Investigator Miller." There was a pause. She heard the water stop and heard Margarita set something down, a plate, maybe, hitting the counter with a soft clink. "Did you find something?" Margarita's voice shifted, wary. She'd been here before with false leads and dead ends. Miller took a breath and let it out slowly. "Yes, we found them." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. "Mrs. Maldonado, your nieces are alive, both of them." The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a gasp and a sob, a sound Miller would remember for the rest of her life. "You're lying," Margarita whispered, with her voice breaking. "You're lying to me." "No, ma'am, I promise you I'm not. They've been alive this whole time. They were adopted as infants. They grew up in California. They didn't know who they were until now." Margarita was crying now, openly, with her breath coming in short bursts. Miller could hear her trying to speak, trying to form words, but nothing came out except that raw sound of grief and joy colliding. "They're alive," Margarita kept saying. "They're alive. They're alive. Yes, ma'am, and they'd like to meet you." The meeting took place a few weeks later. Margarita insisted on meeting them at her home, the same house where Marina had spent so much of her childhood, the same kitchen where they'd had breakfast together, the same doorway where they'd said goodbye. She cleaned for days, dusting surfaces that were already clean and vacuuming carpets that held no dirt. She made food, too much food, enough for an army, because she didn't know what they liked, didn't know if they were vegetarian or allergic to anything, didn't know anything except that they were coming. She set the table 3 times before she got it right. Then she sat by the window and waited. The sound of every car made her heart jump. False alarms, neighbors, delivery trucks. And then, finally, a silver sedan pulled up to the curb. Margarita stood up with her legs weak and her hands starting to shake. 2 women stepped out. One was taller with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, so much like Marina, it hurt to look at her. The other was smaller, with her eyes scanning the house nervously and her hand clutching a purse strap. Margarita walked to the door with her hand on the knob, feeling the cool metal, the realness of this moment. She opened it. For a moment, they just looked at each other, 3 women connected by blood and tragedy, separated by 36 years, standing on a porch in the California heat. Then the taller one, Melissa, formerly Elizabeth, took a step forward. "Tia," she said softly. The word hung in the air between them. Margarita nodded with tears streaming down her face. "Sí, mija, soy yo." Melissa walked forward and fell into her arms. The impact of it, the weight of a grown woman, solid and real, not the baby she'd last held 36 years ago. The smell of her shampoo, the sound of her breathing. Tina, formerly Jasmin, followed, wrapping her arms around them both. They stood there in the doorway, 3 generations stitched back together by blood and memory and the miracle of DNA, crying for the woman who'd brought them all together without ever knowing it. After a while, minutes, maybe, or hours, time had stopped meaning anything. They moved inside. They sat in the living room while Margarita brought out photographs with her hands trembling as she opened the old photo albums. The plastic pages crinkled with the smell of old paper and preserved memories. Marina as a little girl, gap-toothed and grinning. Marina at her quinceañera in a dress she'd saved for months to buy. Marina holding them as babies, Elizabeth in one arm, Jasmin in the other, her face radiant with exhausted love. "She loved you so much," Margarita said, with her voice breaking as she touched Marina's face in the photograph. "She didn't leave you. She would never leave you." Tina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I used to feel abandoned," she said quietly. "My whole childhood, I felt like something was missing, like I'd been thrown away. But now I know. She didn't abandon us. Someone took her from us." Margarita reached over and took her hand with the skin warm and the pulse beating beneath it. "She tried to protect you. Whatever happened out there, she tried." Melissa looked at the photographs with her fingers tracing her mother's face through the plastic sleeve. So close and yet impossible to touch. "I wish I could remember her," she said. "You can't remember with your mind," Margarita said gently, "but maybe you remember with your heart." They sat together as the afternoon light moved across the room. They talked. They cried. They laughed at stories of Marina as a child, mischievous and stubborn and full of life. And for a few hours, in that small living room, Marina Ramos was alive again. But there was still one question no one could answer. Who killed her? With the daughters found alive, Miller refocused on the murder itself. She went back to Oxnard, meeting with Larry Acosta, the park director who'd heard the babies crying in 1989. They sat in his office at the park. Through the window, children played on swings, the same swings that had been there 36 years ago, the same creaking sound carried on the wind. "I always wondered what became of them," Acosta said, his voice thick with emotion. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "They became survivors," Miller told him. She met with Officer Scott Hebert, who'd responded to the call that December morning. He was retired now, but he still had his report from that day. He'd kept it in a box in his garage, among other cases that had stayed with him. He pulled it out carefully. The paper yellowed, his handwriting from 36 years ago, younger, more rushed. "I never forgot those babies," he said, looking at the words he'd written. "You don't forget something like that, the sound of them crying, how small they were." He looked up at Miller. "Are they really okay?" "They're more than okay," Miller said. "They're strong, they have families, they survived." Hebert nodded, his eyes wet. "Good, that's good." The Oxnard Police Department shared everything they had, witness statements typed on manual typewriters, descriptions of the 3 adults seen in the park, the woman in the red skirt and white boots, the 2 Hispanic males, the black mini pickup truck, the yellow blanket. But 36 years had passed. Memories had faded like those old photographs. People had moved away, or died, or simply stopped caring. And Fernando, if that was even his real name, had vanished as completely as smoke. Miller interviewed Marina's family again. Rosa, who'd watched them drive away that morning. Relatives who remembered Fernando vaguely, a man who appeared and disappeared, who smiled easily but never quite met your eyes. He said he was from Ontario, Rosa remembered. He had an apartment there, or at least that's what Marina told me. Did she mention his last name? Rosa shook her head. Just Fernando. I should have asked more questions. I should have... You couldn't have known, Miller said gently. But Rosa's face said what her mouth didn't. I should have stopped her. In October 2025, the Mojave County Sheriff's Office released a composite sketch of Fernando based on descriptions from Marina's family and the few people who'd met him. Hispanic male, medium build, early 30s at the time, which would make him late 60s now, dark hair, clean-shaven, average height, the kind of face that blended into crowds. They also described the woman in the red skirt and white boots, and the two men seen with her at the park. Someone knows something, Miller said in a press conference, the cameras flashing, reporters leaning forward. Someone saw something. If you have any information, no matter how small, please come forward. She gave out the tip line number. She held up photographs of Marina, young and smiling. This was a mother, a daughter, a sister. She deserves justice. Her family deserves answers. The tip line received dozens of calls, but nothing concrete. People thought they remembered a man named Fernando, a woman in distinctive clothing. But memory is unreliable. Time erodes details. Faces blur together. The case remains open. Somewhere, Miller believes, someone knows what happened on that desert road in December 1989. Someone was there. Someone saw. Someone helped. And that person is still out there, carrying the truth like a stone in their chest. Melissa and Tina have chosen to keep much of their story private. They've met with their biological family. They've learned about their mother, about the woman she was, about the life she tried to build for them. They've spent hours looking at photographs. Marina holding them. Marina laughing. Marina exhausted in that way all new mothers are, but smiling through it. They've learned her favorite color was blue. That she loved music. That she sang to them at night. Songs in Spanish that neither of them remembers, but somehow feels familiar. They've connected with their older sister in Puerto Rico, the one who never stopped searching, who submitted her DNA to every database hoping for a miracle. The first phone call lasted 3 hours. 3 sisters, finally talking, filling in 36 years of silence. I always knew you were out there, the oldest sister told them, her voice breaking. I never stopped believing. The 3 sisters talk regularly now, planning visits, sharing photographs, building a relationship that was stolen from them 36 years ago. Melissa and Tina have children of their own now. They've become mothers in a way their own mother never got the chance to be. They tell their children about Marina, about the grandmother they'll never meet, about the woman who loved them so much she died trying to protect them. It's strange, Melissa said in an interview, her voice soft. I'm older now than she ever was. Marina Ramos was 28 when she died. Her daughters are now 36 and 37. They've outlived her, and in doing so, they've become the witnesses to a life she never got to finish. For Margarita Maldonado, the truth has not brought peace. Not really. It has brought clarity. It has brought an end to the wondering, the hoping, the what-ifs that haunted her for 36 years. But peace is something else, something that requires knowing who and why, not just what. She visits Marina's grave now, a real grave with a real headstone, not just a plot marked Jane Doe. She brings flowers. She talks to her sister. She tells her about the girls, about who they've become. She deserved more time, Margarita has said. She deserved to see who they became. But Marina never got that chance. She never saw her daughters learn to walk, to read, to drive. She never met their children. She never heard them call themselves mothers. She never got to be old, to have gray hair and grandchildren and stories about the old days. All she left behind was 2 crying babies on a bathroom floor and a body in the desert that took 33 years to name. But she also left behind love. And that love, somehow, kept her daughters alive, kept them together, brought them home. As of November 2025, Marina Ramos's killer has not been found. The investigation is active. The Mojave County Sheriff's Office continues to follow leads, re-interview witnesses, and review evidence with modern forensic tools. They're looking for Fernando, for the woman in the red skirt and white boots, for the two men who helped carry two babies into a park bathroom and then disappeared. They're analyzing the footprints found at the crime scene, two sets, two suspects, preserved in photographs even though the desert wind long ago erased them from the earth. They're reviewing phone records from 1989, tracking movements, building timelines. Someone knows. Someone was there. Someone is still out there, carrying the answer. Investigator Lori Miller has made it clear, no piece of information is too small. If somebody could just point out anything, she said, any direction, we will follow it. The difficulty is compounded by the passage of time. Witnesses have died. Memories have faded, evidence has been lost to floods and fires and the simple carelessness of bureaucracy. But DNA doesn't forget, and neither do the people who loved Marina. The desert is still there, silent and unchanging. Old Temple Bar Road runs through it like a scar, the same road Marina traveled in December 1989, the last road she ever saw. Tourists still drive that way, heading toward the Grand Canyon, unaware that they are passing the spot where a mother died and a mystery began. The Joshua trees stand watch over nothing. The heat still rises in waves. The horizon still shimmers with false water. The footprints are long gone. The evidence is decades old, but the question remains, suspended in the dry air like dust. Who killed Marina Ramos? Someone knows. Someone watched her die. Someone left her body in the open. Someone drove away with two babies in the back seat and abandoned them on a cold bathroom floor. Someone went home that night and ate dinner, watched television, went to sleep. Someone has been living with this for 36 years, and until that person speaks, or until science catches up to silence, Marina's story will remain unfinished. But her daughters? They've already written the next chapter. They survived. They found each other. They found their family. And they learned the truth their mother fought to protect. She didn't abandon them. She loved them. She was trying to keep them safe. And in the end, even though she couldn't save herself, her love saved them. Two babies on a bathroom floor became two women with families of their own. Two names that were lost became two lives that were found. Marina Ramos is gone. But Elizabeth and Jasmin, Melissa and Tina are here. They are her legacy. They are her voice. They are proof that even in the darkest circumstances, there are paths forward that no one can predict. They are proof that love doesn't die, even when the person who gave it does. They are proof that some stories, even the ones that begin in tragedy, can still have chapters of hope. Thanks for watching. If this story got to you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next mystery. See you soon.